also white rhythms that were apparent. There were marches. And people took that and began to syncopate. And that became ragtime music. And ragtime music was essentially an African-American expression that drew from the march tradition. And marching bands were very, very big in the 19th century. I don't think Americans realized how much there was band music. Every little town had a little bandstand, and amateur musicians would collect on Friday nights and play band concerts and they played European music, but they also played, increasingly, American music. Sousa was only the last great expression of
so would that be
that kind of music.
like a German influence? The band
German, Austrian, yeah. French too. I mean, right. Marching was a big thing in Europe.
I've heard of you.
Became an art form, but the musicians who played ragtime were fighting against a trend of entertainment that was dance music, you know, and they would write instructions in their very slow march time. Do not play fast. Do not syncopate this. They were really trying desperately to keep this a classical form of music. And they failed because people kept on jazzing it up. I mean, you could play the very regular, you know, you could play that, but people kept on going, jazzing it up, and that wasn't ragtime. But it became one of the formative types of expression in jazz. And that drag, the drag came from blues, came from work songs, came from the expression that was first heard in slavery of men working in the fields and using rhythm and music to make first of all, make their day more acceptable to them, but also to keep them in the rhythm of picking cotton or baling hay or whatever they were doing. And, you know, Odetta used to sing a lot of those songs. Waterboy, you know, those kinds of songs were, and I can't possibly play them on the piano. They wouldn't sound good on the piano. But those are the kind of songs that formed that dragging kind of bluesy rhythm. Blues itself is simply accidental notes, right? I mean, it's a scale of C. These are accidental notes. They don't belong to that. And you put the blue note in, and you have the difference between. And there's the emotion of the blue note is what made that music unique. But blues developed alongside ragtime. The same period of time that more sophisticated populations were listening to ragtime music, and white people were listening to waltz tempos and popular music like sold millions of copies because people fell in love with that kind of music, and of course you know that was a very popular song. It was not a promotion for the Oldsmobile car. It was a very, very popular song. But ragtime musicians persisted in playing what they felt was classical music. It's not party music. It's meant to be played for an audience that is listening to it. It's just like symphonic music. And it died. Until Hamlish and Josh Rifkin and I went to Juilliard together, by the way. We were in the same class, theory class at Juilliard. And Josh Rifkin was the first guy to record the Joplin Regs in their original form for the then very new None Such Records. Until those two people revived this music, it hadn't been heard for 60 years. Because you couldn't do anything with it. It wasn't adaptable to parties and informal music making, and it certainly wasn't danceable. So out of syncopating up ragtime or dragging ragtime, out of the marches, out of the blues, became early jazz, which was Dixieland jazz, which was Louis Armstrong's jazz. Those elements all combined to form Dixieland jazz. There are modern equivalents of that kind of amalgamation. Is anybody familiar with Tejano music?
What kind?
Tejano.
Isn't.
Puerto Rico?
No, it's Mexican Texan. One of the great advocates of Tejano music was that woman Selena, who was shot by a fan about 10 years ago. Her father was one of the great Tejano musicians of the 30s, and she was a great advocate of a modern. But Tejano is simply mariachi music, which is Mexican, combined with German music from the German settlers in New Braunfels and other parts of Texas who brought umpa. So Tejano music is a mishmash, just the way early jazz was a mishmash. It is, the Germans brought the accordion, for example, to Mexican musicians who had never, wouldn't dream of using an accordion. They didn't know what an accordion was. And Tejano music is a very, very popular subgenre of music down on the border. And you should really YouTube some Tejano music and listen to it. It's really wonderful. But that was one of the formative expressions of that kind of music, just the way Dixieland was one of the formative expressions of American jazz in the sense of being a mishmash of traditions. What I wanted to do today was to take a song and show you how a jazz musician would approach playing a song. So I picked A Foggy Day because it's something everybody knows. And there are copies here, those of you who read music can follow along.
Copies enough for triple our number.
Right. Well, I'm going to do this again.
Yeah, that's it.
So I guess you and Ed certainly know what a fake book is. This is copied from the real book. And if you want to play jazz music at home, I really urge you to buy at least the first volume of the real book, which is now a legal fake book. Musicians used to write these things down, mimeograph them, or somehow duplicate them, and put them into binders, which they called fake books, and they take them around on their gigs because it was a way to remember the heads of the music that they wanted to play. And they work on the chording, and they didn't bother doing a transcription of the chording. They simply wrote the chords above the notes. So all you have in a fake book is the melody and what the chord should be. And if you look at A Foggy Day, the chords are F major with a seventh. And then the second chord is A minor, the dash is a minor, with a seventh, and a flatted fifth. So A minor, flatted fifth. And then the third chord is a D7 with a flatted ninth. But the flatted ninth is in the melody. Do you notice that that's an E flat? this straight the way the chords are written, I would play. Accurate, but not very interesting. So what we try to do is we try to break up the chords or use other accidental notes to make it sound more textured. And then F6 is the 6. And that doesn't exist on this chart. But it's a transitional chord that leads to what you're looking for when you try to score one of these for your own hands is you're looking for the kind of texture that makes you comfortable. And when I noodle around on a song, I will work for hours, looking for the right kind of sound that makes me comfortable, but it never comes out the same way twice. I mean, I don't write it down, so it never comes out the same way twice. Now, I'm sure if you sat down and played it, you play the sax, right?
Clarinet.
Clarinet.
I play a little piano, but not.
But you play it entirely differently. I mean,
Somewhat differently. So.
yeah. Every musician will play what makes him most comfortable. And then, of course, there's the question of rhythm and tempo. When you're playing with a group, you have to agree on a tempo. When you're playing by yourself, you don't. But, you can play this as a ballad, like I just did, or... This is an interesting song in that it is slightly unstandard. As I'm sure Paul and Ed know, a standard American popular song has 32 bars. And it usually is divided into two forms. One form is the first 8 bars are played and then repeated, which is the case here. And then there's a 8-bar bridge or second melody in the middle, followed by a recapitulation of the original 8 bars, forming 32 bars. This one has 34 bars. The other form is 16 bars repeated. An example of that, I think, is Out of Nowhere, right? goes back to the beginning. It does it again.
That's actually what this song is, except as a 2-bar insert.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, there is no bridge.
If you,
Yeah.
if you eliminated those 2 bars, it would be the A prime.
Right. Right. You're right. I'm sorry. Let's do an example of a 8/8 and bridge and 8. The most famous one is "I've Got Rhythm." Eight bars. Another 8 bars. Then back to the beginning. As some of you know, "I've Got Rhythm" is probably played more than any other standard American tune, because every musician from when it was written through to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and all the bop musicians, and then going on beyond that, have taken that standard song and created their own melodies, their own versions of it. I mean, Bird must have done about 10 or 12 versions of "I've Got Rhythm," because it's such a, it's like it's like an herb, you know. It's like it is so beautifully constructed that you can do anything with it. I mean, Bird did. No, I didn't.
Is that Crazyology or something?
Yeah, Crazyology. Yeah, and he just added that little extra chording, but it's basically "I've Got Rhythm," and it's been done, I don't know, hundreds of times. The next thing I wanted to talk about was improvisation. I am profoundly left-handed, and when I play music, I'm incapable of verbal expression, which is why I could never be a cocktail pianist. I could never sing while I play, because my mind stops verbalizing. I somehow, people would walk up to me when I'm seriously playing the piano and engage me in conversation, and I just couldn't reply unless I kind of turned it off and just vamped, you know, so I could have a conversation. Other musicians are not so cursed. They're able to chew gum and bicycle at the same time. And I envy them. When I see Ann Hampton Callaway sit down and start singing while she's playing this incredibly complex stuff on the piano, it just drives me nuts. But I had the pleasure, the honor of playing once with Marion McPartland. She visited John Mahegan's class at Juilliard, and she played double piano with most of the students, and I got to sit in with her. And while she was playing with me, she was talking to John about something entirely, you know. And anyway, it's just I was 17. It was really something. But my point was that when you improvise, what you're trying to do is work within the harmonic structure of the song but you're trying to create not only a melody, but you're trying to create an emotion. You're trying to create something that expresses not necessarily what you think about the song, but what you think about the moment. So if you take a foggy day, it's really easy to do scales like but that doesn't express anything. When you're learning to improvise, I've said to people, you should try scales, but you should try to syncopate them. And that gives you a little bit more expression. And then, of course, there's breaking up the chords. So you're playing essentially what we would, arpeggios. But when you start to just let your mind wander freely is when you're really improvising. That's just a free improvisation on a foggy day. When you're playing groups with other musicians, you have to be aware of what they're doing. You can't, jump off the reservation the way you can when you're playing solo. And lastly, there's a form of jazz called free jazz. Do you play any free jazz?
I haven't, it'd be like Ornette Coleman style.
Yeah.
I haven't done that. I guess I've been more bebop and post-bebop.
I've only done it for myself. I've never done it with other musicians. I've never found any musicians that wanted to do it with.
Actually, I would want to do it. Actually,
I've never tried it sometime.
I've never had the occasion to explore with anybody.
When I'm sitting at a piano and I'm just, letting my mind wander, I start to do things like this. Just working on sounds, rhythms.
So how do people play that together?
Well,
good question.
You play it together by somebody coming up with a theme and then working to expand that idea. You take an idea, for example, if the idea was you work on expanding that idea.
maybe create structures out of the spontaneous combustion, if you will.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to create a structure, otherwise you can't collaborate. But it's an improvised structure. I mean, the structure is created on the spot or is created in rehearsal and then charted a little bit so you have an idea of where you're going to start, but not where you're going to finish. There are some songs, and this gets to that gray area, there are some songs that to my mind are so gorgeous that improvisation doesn't add to them. My favorite like that, there's nothing else you want to do with it. That's one. Another one that I love to play a lot, I want to inflict it on you, is Set 'em Up Joe, you know,
Oh, yeah.
which is a 58 bar tune, incidentally. That was written by Harold Arlen for Fred Astaire. Yeah, it starts, well, I'll play a little bit of it. It starts,
To dance to.
what?
For Fred Astaire to dance to?
No, for him
No,
to
he
sing.
sings it.
Really?
It starts in E flat. it's perfect in and of itself. And there's a lot of things happening in that tune that bear on the roots of jazz. Because Arlen was, first of all, the son of a rabbi who was supposed to become a cantor until he ran away from home. So there's a lot of Jewish influence in what he wrote. There's a lot of blues influence in what he wrote. There's a lot of drag. You hear those drag notes, constantly throughout everything he did. And there's a lot of straight rhythm in what he wrote, because he was writing mostly for dance music, for clubs. He was the resident composer at the black clubs in Harlem, at Smalls and Minton's, throughout the 30s, writing the music that was sung there by people like the young Nina Horn and other black performers. And he also wrote the music for The Wizard of Oz, which is, to my mind, one of the 3 or 4 best movies ever made. But
He was not 2 composers, just he.
he was the musician. He wrote the music.
Right.
Yip Harburg wrote the lyrics.
Right.
E.Y. Harburg. And they cooperated on several other projects too, including Broadway shows. I'm trying to think of the Broadway shows they did. They did House of Flowers.
You wrote "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes," didn't you?
Yeah, he wrote Stormy Weather for Lena Horne. He wrote Happiness is a Thing Called Joe for Ethel Waters. I mean, the guy was an incredible musician. And he and Gershwin are the 2 white musicians who owe the most to black music. There were a lot of other white musicians who wrote wonderful music, which is jazz music, Kern, Porter, but Gershwin understood the blues and Arlen understood the blues, and Arlen understood the blues in the way that no other composer. Straight blues. Most blues, which is an important component of everything we do in jazz, turned out to have a very rigid structure, the 12-bar blues. And when you hear shouters sing old music, you can easily hear the origins of the 12-bar blues. And the 12-bar blues is simply, let me play a real blues. Here's one from my youth. What's the name of that?
Symphony Sid.
Symphony Sid.
It's a 12-bar progression that is constantly repeated and can be played in, well, the most popular keys for playing blues are B flat, E flat, F. For some reason, I have never heard, other than Jimmy Giuffre's Swingin' Shepherd Blues, I've never heard blues written in the key of G. Why is that?
It's a happy key.
It's weird, but Jimmy Giuffre, who was a jazz flutist in the 50s,
Clarinet
player.
only blues I've ever heard in the key of G. I used to go watch him at the Village Vanguard.
I used to have a recording of Clyde McCoy playing trumpet.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like with a lot of muted stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
lost that LP a long time ago.
It's a very popular, it was a very popular tune back in the day. So, comments, questions?